I've been climbing like 6 years and I've been injured like 20 times. Most of them when I'm feeling really strong too. Just saying. My very first climbing related injuries were small tweaks in the fingers that recovered in just a few days or a couple of weeks at most. Maybe not even what I'd really consider an injury. But my first notable injury was a pulley tear on my ring finger of my right hand. It was an acute injury, meaning it happened suddenly when I was cranking on one bad crimp too many times in a row. But I believe over climbing and under resting was the reason that I was susceptible to that injury. Next up, I started dealing with climber's elbow, which I believe was primarily a result of an increase in my climbing and training volume. I got psyched on pumpy sport climbing, lots of pull-ups, hangboard repeaters, basically tried to do all the training I could without really giving my body the time to adapt and be ready for the increase. As I started climbing harder and doing a little more bouldering, I started to get a few shoulder tweaks. Nothing that lasted more than a few weeks, but enough to get me scared. I started a consistent routine of shoulder complex exercises that built up my base level of strength in both climbing posture and injury prevention. The next injury kicked me right in the ass. Almost literally. I was living in Chicago and pretty much going on a climbing trip every weekend with the Climb House, but I was also spending about 40% of my time in San Diego visiting my girlfriend Rachel, who lived there at the time. I would sit all day for work and then I would go and hike a whole bunch and get out 3 or 4 times or sometimes even more in a week because I was so psyched about the year-round climbability in San Diego. And our hikes at Devil's Lake or the Red or Governor's Dodge would oftentimes put some mileage on my legs as well. It really snuck up on me. I wasn't sure what was going on at first, and I just had this little tickle of pain at the connection point on the sit bone where your hamstring connects. So I started stretching it and foam rolling it, which I ultimately found out was making it worse, which really sucked, and I couldn't figure out how to get control of it. Although largely self-diagnosed, I'm pretty sure this is what's called a proximal hamstring tendinopathy. There might have been some triggering event on a high heel hook or an awkward climbing position of some sort, but mostly it's due to just overuse and you get the compression of that tendon on the sit bone while you're sitting, and then you get the overwork of it while you're hiking and climbing, and then it rests at night, but if it's not enough rest to catch all the way back up, and you go back and do the same thing again and compress it during the day and overstress it during hiking and climbing, all of a sudden you get in this tendinopathy, which basically just means your tendon is in a state of disarray and bad news and sending pain signals and possibly some jumbled collagen alignment. At this same time, I was also dealing with some plantar fasciitis, which is really caused by a lot of the same stuff, just too much time spent on your feet, maybe in too poor of shoes, too much time in the climbing shoes walking around, and just not enough full rest overall. Around this same time, while sport climbing on one of my projects at the Red, I did this sideways heel hooky thing and had a pop in my knee. Felt kind of weird that evening, felt pretty bad hiking out, and then felt like horrible the next day. Ended up having to do like 7 or 8 weeks of rehab to get it fully strengthened back up. I did go to the doctor, but I can't remember exactly what it was. It was like a contusion and then like some other stuff, some swelling and some fluid in there and things like that. But luckily no torn ligaments or anything. The most recent injury I've been dealing with is this like nerve issue in the right arm. I think it's related to basically a combination of too much work on the computer for work on the laptop for editing, and then you put climbing time, which just adds volume and takes away the rest that it could be having from those repetitive activities. And something either gets loud motorcycle. And something either gets pinched or like irritated or like stuck or something like that. And you start to get these tingles that can track all the way from like these 2 fingers and thumb all the way anywhere up the arm and shoulder, up into the cheek and ear even. And at various times I can feel tingles anywhere along that chain. It's pretty wild actually. You might be picking up on a theme here. In order to avoid injuries, you gotta manage your frickin' volume, man. I know your muscles feel like they can take it, and maybe they can, but here's the problem. Muscles give great sensory feedback, so you have a pretty good feel for when they're recovered, but they also recover quite quickly compared to other parts of your body. I feel like joints are kind of complicated and I don't really know enough about them overall. The tendons, ligaments, and connective tissues not only give poor sensory feedback, but also take a long time to recover. So even though your muscles feel recovered and you don't feel anything from your tendons, ligaments, and pulleys potentially, you may still have a lot of recovery left to go and be under resting and over climbing over the long term. So seriously, less is more, especially in your first handful of years of climbing. You gotta manage your volume of both climbing and training to prevent injuries, and maybe check out one of these videos that could help as well. Thanks for watching, folks.